Hey, what's up, guys? So, in this lesson, I'm gonna walk you to the process of how to get started with Python. And by getting started, I mean more from a sense of downloading the interpreter, getting picking a text editor, and then ultimately, running your code. Right? How do you get started? Right? Very basic. It's all about the basics, guys. Um, if you create a Python file, how do you run it? Where do you run it? A lot of just very basic concepts here, right? It's all about anybody who's new trying to get started, and this is the whole purpose of this video, guys. Try to educate y'all, and hopefully it's beneficial. So that's what we're going to be talking about in this lesson. So in order to run your Python code, let's say you're new and you're learning, you're following tutorials, you want to be able to write the Python code and be able to run it and see the results. In order to do that, you need to have a interpreter. Now there's different versions of interpreters that are out there. But first, go ahead and go to python.org. This is the official website where you could download either the latest interpreter or a specific version of interpreters, that are out there. I recommend download it directly from this site. There's other sites that you can find copies of the interpreter, but again, just to be safe, I will just come here and get it from here. So we go to the download section. See how it says latest version, Python 3.11, and then you'll see some little notes here, Python 3.9 or newer cannot be ran on Windows 7 or earlier. So those are just certain things to keep in mind, depending on your operating system that you're using. So normally, anytime when you come here to go to the download section, you're always going to see the newest version that's out there, Python 3.11. Now, one of the things that I would suggest to you is don't always download the newest version that's out there unless you have a purpose for it, or unless you're strictly going to use it just to be playing around and maybe learning. And for the most of that should be okay. But I say that because there are some applications like packages. Again, if you're new, it may not make sense yet, but there's packages, third-party packages of like other developers. They create, think of them as modules for Python that do specific functionality. And some of these packages have limitations where it only works between version A and B. And sometimes that version, what I have seen, it stops at 3.10. And I just had a good example of one not that long ago. I ended up setting up my VM with Windows 11 like 2 days ago. And I ended up installing the latest Python 3.11. And of course, when I try to install my packages, my third-party packages, there was like a few, like 2 or 3 that could not be installed because they were limited to only 3.10, version. The one thing I would say, again, if you're new, 3.9, you can't go wrong with 3.9. 3.9 it's kind of like, it's that version that I think right now seems to kind of work with the majority, if not all, third-party packages out there. It's not limited. If it is, they have been updated. Those packages have been updated to accommodate for it. So 3.9 is that nice version that you shouldn't have any issues with. So that's just something to keep in mind. So when you come to the download section, you have Windows, Mac, and I'm not sure, I guess other platforms, maybe Linux. But ultimately, you have all the operating systems, right? In our case, I am on a Windows machine. So we will go to Windows. And then from here, you could tell latest version is Python 3.11. And you'll find some notes of when it was released. But I would recommend download at the latest, the stable version of which is 3.10 or 3.9, which is probably somewhere down below. There it goes, December. So pretty much this will updated like 2 months ago, which is 3.9.16. Again, keep in mind, this only works for Windows 10 and above. So you're using Windows 7 still or older, then yeah, you would have to go to a probably 3.8 But again, even then, this is limited to does not work on Windows XP. So again, just keep that in mind, depending on your operating system. Nevertheless, keep things easy. I would recommend use 3.10. If not, if there's a specific reason that you're aware of, or you just want to be safe because you're not sure, because you'll be dealing with production code, most likely you could probably go with 3.9 and you should be fine for the most F. All right, so that's just something to keep in mind. Again, I'm installing this on Windows because it does not come with Windows. All right, Mac and Linux comes with Python installed already. I believe it's Python 3.9 that it comes with by default for Linux and Mac. So that's one of the nice things about those operating systems is Python just is included. It's already included out of the box. Whereas for Windows, it is not. So you do have to install it. That's why I'm showing you on the Windows PC, because Windows, most likely you would have to install it. So let's say we're going to install 3.10. Just click on the link. Scroll down, see where it says files. So you can find all kinds of different files. The easiest thing you could do is just go to the recommended version, which in this case 64-bit. Unless there's a specific reason, then I will say install 32-bit. But if there's not a reason that you're aware of, 64-bit. I will go through another video later on explaining why this does matter and where it will cause issues potentially. More so when you're compiling the code because you're creating executable files and things of that nature. But that will be another video. For now, in general, I will say go with the 64-bit Windows installer. It will be straightforward. You click on it. We're going to go ahead and install this or download it. Let me just click on download. And we're going to go through the process. I already have this installed, so I'm not going to install nothing. But I do want to walk you through the process. So see, you can tell it's already on here, but normally you would be able to, specify where you wanted to go. I recommend doing the custom installation because it allows you to pick the folder and other things of that nature, right? So you kind of pick what do you want. In this case, everything that we're showing, I think is fine to leave by default. See where it says for all users. I recommend clicking that. Ultimately, that means that if you're in a computer, potentially other people could log into, they could use the interpreter as well. You could add a shortcut, add Python to environment variables. So this is key. You want to make sure that that's clicked because it'll add it to your environment variable, which means you could activate it easily by typing the Python keyword in your terminal or command prompt to activate the interpreter. So we want to keep that active, checked. And then see down here where it says location. I recommend put it, make sure that it's going under program files. And then whatever, in this case, would be whatever version, right? 310. If you're dealing with 311, it will be 311. So like that, if you do have multiple versions of Python, you can install multiple versions, especially if you're doing testing, right? You're trying to test or maybe you're trying to upgrade your source code. You want to have the folder with the different version at the end. So to see if it works, if there's any issues and things of that nature as well. Then of course you click install. Again, I already have it installed, so I'm not going to install it. But again, in your case, click install. You will see it install. Then it'll say finish, and then that's it, guys. You're done. And that would ultimately install Python on your machine. Once Python is installed to your machine, want to cancel? Yes. Then now we could activate it through the command prompt. So to do that, I'm going to go to my command prompt and I'm going to open up command prompt. So now that I'm in the command prompt, if I were to type in, again, remember the keyword is Python. In this case, it would be Python. You'll see it activated. Now, there are some cases where you have multiple versions of Python where you do have to type in the name is not Python. It may be Python 3, for example. I believe this is more for like the older, back in the day when especially when you're dealing with Python 2.7, then Python 3.4, for example, and you installed both. The way that worked with Python, if you type in the word Python, it would be for the version 2.7. You type in the word Python 3, it will be for whatever version that you have that's of the 3 Python 3 anyways, right? Whether it be Python 3.4, 3.10, whatever it is, it'll activate that interpreter. Nowadays, Python 2 is not utilized unless there's a specific need, which there's probably some old source codes out there that are, of course, using Python 2. But in general, most that I have seen, most that I have worked on anyways, have been upgraded to Python 3. There was even a project that I worked on for a client where I built them an application in Python 2.7 years ago. Then they asked me to pretty much add a new feature to the application. And ultimately, what we ended up doing, we just ended up upgrading, converting the code over from 2.7 to 3.7. Nobody really uses 2.7 anymore. So again, let's go ahead and activate Python. We type in the word Python. You could tell it tells the version that we have, and we have activated it. And now that it's activated, you could tell would be we could technically write Python code here. Like if I were to type x equals 5, right? No errors. So it took it, it assigned that 5 value to my x variable. Y equals 7. And then let's do z equals x plus y. So now z is x plus y. So now if I were to print, so print is a key word that's used in Python, a function that's assigned for Python. You can't use it for nothing else. So in this case, we would have print z, we will get 12, right? So ultimately, I'm running Python code, one code at a time. And then if there is an error, like let's say I print wrong, we'll get an error message and it will tell us, this is not defined. Did you mean print, right? Even kind of give us a suggestion. In this case, is this what we meant? So that's kind of how, again, guys, we install Python. We're interacting with Python. But ideally, though, you would need a text editor. Like I would strongly recommend to install a text editor besides Notepad. There's a lot of text editors out there that are very feature rich. The one that we're going to be looking at is going to be Visual Studio Code. So if you go to the website code.visualstudio.com, you will find the Visual Studio Code application. So this application was developed by Microsoft, and it's a text editor, guys. That's really what it is, but it's a very souped up text editor. Auto completion, color syntax. There's all kinds of extensions that you could add on to it to kind of help out. Templates, things of that nature. So very powerful. I like it a lot. It's free. So that's a big piece of it too. And it's very lightweight, I feel like. Even if you don't have a powerful computer, it runs pretty smooth. So by default, they kind of know your operating system. Like if you're on a Mac, it would tell you download for Mac. Linux, download for Linux. So it knows that I'm on a Windows, so it tells me download for Windows. So in this case, you would just click on download for Windows, and then ultimately it's trying to download, right? I'm gonna hit save. Again, I already have this installed, but we'll walk through the process. This one is downloading the latest version, and it's fine. It is actually fine that it downloads the latest version. So I actually have it on. So let me cancel. I have it open, already. So we'll get this message, just the agreement, click accept, click next. So see, when it's going to ask you want to create a icon, that's up to you. But see where it says add open code from Windows Explorer. So in Windows, I guess I could show you, right? So in Windows, if you have a Python file here somewhere, there's a way you could do a right click and then you could have it open through, like I don't have a Python file right now to show, but you could, there it goes, open with code. See how where it shows open with code? So it's kind of like shortcuts that would just open it directly. So if you want that, then yes, go ahead and make sure to add these on there. Add past requirement. Yep, I will say add that as well. Click next. And then it's going to have you install this, right? So again, I already have it installed, so I'm not going to install it. But this is what you would do to get that. This is very straightforward, guys, to install. There are other notable text editors that I use that I would recommend, like Sublime Text is another one that I actually like a lot. You have Atom, And again, there's many more, guys. Notepad plus plus, but for me, my go-to is Visual Studio Code and Sublime Text. So there are other not I want to say text editors, but more IDEs that I use that function the same as the text editor, like PyCharm. But that's a whole different. You have to pay for those if you get the version, at least the version that I have, anyways. So again, you run it, you install it. So now let's go ahead and open it up. We're gonna go ahead and launch Visual Studio Code, and then we're gonna create a file. So one thing with Visual Studio Code is you have your menu on the side where you kind of open up a folder, create a file, things of that nature. So I'm gonna open up a folder real quick, which I have one right here, which is Sandbox, Python, something, right? So I'm gonna select this folder. I'm gonna trust it. So this is asking you want to trust this pass. I'm gonna select yes, I do trust it. Now that I'm in here, it's still blank on the side. What I'm gonna do here, you have two options. You could right click and add a new file. That's option number one. Or you could create a new, I guess it would be a new text file, right? As you could tell, it's untitled. Then you got to select the language. So in my case, if I click on select languages, I'm going to type Python, hit enter. So now you got a little Python icon here. It's an actual Python file. Now it's not saved. Keep in mind, it's still untitled. So I would recommend, let's go ahead and save as to the same folder. And I'm going to call this sample code. Save. So now anytime any file, Python file that you're creating, you're always going to see the extension at the end, .py. That's a Python file. That's how you know it's a Python script. It's .py. So now the same code that we tested earlier in the command prompt, we could go ahead and test here. X equals 5, Y equals 7, then Z equals, see how we get the little red squiggly lines? That tells us that it's identifying there's an error, right? There's an issue of some sort. Now, once we, continue typing, if it sees like, okay, there's no error no more, so the squiggly line goes away because everything's good now. And then, of course, we're going to do print Z. So now there's a few things. I could go ahead and save this, and I could run this in the command prompt, or I could open up a new instance here under terminal and go to new terminal. And what you will see is it actually goes into the folder that I'm at. This is the folder that I'm at, that Python, this is a folder here. And you'll see it. I'm inside that folder. So I could go ahead and click on. So one thing I'm going to change. Yeah, I could go ahead and click on directory, and it shows the file. So this is a PowerShell terminal that I have open. I'm going to switch it to command prompt. Same thing. And once I switch it to command prompt, it still takes me to the same folder, same path. So now, again, if I click directory, I can see the file, right? That's the only file that I have in here. And then what I could do now, I could run this file. So in order to run it, again, keyword is going to be Python. If I type Python with no arguments, and by arguments mean I don't specify a file or anything, it's going to start the Python interactive terminal where you could interact with it. But in our case, I have a file. So I'm going to call it, which is sample code py. As you could tell, as I type in Python sample code py, now it shows up in here. And if I hit enter, it's going to go ahead and run. And then now as it runs, it tells us our value, which is 12. So again, that's ultimately what it's doing, is running this code. But instead of having to type it line by line the way we did it before, we could just have our code in a file, then we just run the file. We call the file, and then Python will ultimately run all of this code and give us back results, or do whatever it is that you're trying to do, right? So that's how you would end up executing this Python file. Now, there's ways to pass in arguments, right? See how we have a 5 and 7? Well, these are variable value that could be changed. Like, they may not be 5 all the time. Maybe we want to add, 115 plus 1,000 whatever. Well, so there's a way that you could, if I go back, right, Python sample code. Let me move this up. Where we could add arguments, right? It could be like the first argument could be X, and it could be some big number space. Then the second argument would be Y, some other big number. And ultimately, these values will come from here, right? Instead of coming from the actual code that we have. Now that's a whole different video, and that will be more in my advanced Python course that I'm going to be making, and I'll kind of go over variables because that comes very handy on certain things that you may be doing or working on. But again, guys, at least this kind of gives an example and kind of shows you on how to install Python, how to interact with Python in the terminal command prompt, how to make, install a text editor, in my case, Visual Studio Code, and then how to use it, right? Create a file, interact with the file, execute the file, things of that nature, guys. So again, hopefully this video was beneficial. Hopefully it helps. And again, guys, thanks for watching. Peace.